Welcome to Galen Sky's podcast. We have a special segment for you guys. So the 3rd of May is World Press Freedom Day, and I am joined by Nqaba Matshazi and Delta Milayo, who will tell us a little bit more about World Press Freedom Day, what it means, and what it means for all of us. Hi, guys.
Hi, Natasha.
How are you?
I know you guys are journalists, so I feel the pressure to, be professional, but indulge me. How are you guys doing?
We're great. Thanks, Natasha.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So where are you guys now? How's lockdown before we get into it? Or is there lockdown wherever you are?
It's boring. There's lockdown from like 10 p.m. Like when the party starts already, you're supposed to be going home. We're in Namibia, in Windhoek, where we came for the World Press Freedom Day celebrations, which started on Wednesday or Thursday. I'm not too sure. Yeah. So we started with the Africa Regional Forum, where Delta was a speaker. Yeah, just going places. And
I agree with what he said.
So yeah, it was, we did the Africa Forum on Thursday. Then today there's going to be the official opening, I think in a couple of hours time with the president of Namibia. So it's been a very hectic week, but yeah, we're getting there.
That's good. So tell us a little bit more about what World Press Freedom Day is and why this year in particular is really special. So for people that don't know, if you could explain what World Press Freedom Day, why Namibia, what the significance is.
Okay. In 1991, on May 3, journalists from Africa met in Windhoek at a UNESCO forum where they were coming up with some resolutions about a free press. It was just print media journalists, because you can imagine how 1991 was. So they were talking about free media, free speech. Then in, I think 20 years later, it was upgraded. A few years later, I think 4 years later, that became the foundation for World Press Freedom Day, when they made the Windhoek Declaration for a free and independent media. Because if you look at 91, I think the last country out of Africa to receive its independence was Namibia in 1990. So there was a bit of movement in that regard, in terms of that the free media is important for the development of countries. So in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, there was another meeting where they upgraded the Windhoek Declaration and included things like broadcasting. And well, the landscape has changed a lot since then. Now there's internet. The internet as a broadcasting tool, I think you know that better than most of us, because that's where you are domiciled. So using that, so it kept being upgraded or something. Is that the right word? Yeah.
Yeah, we
updated. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. So it kept being updated. Now it's 30 years after Windhoek, and now there's a need to come up with a Windhoek Plus 30 declaration, which is looking at contemporary issues. I think things like the viability of the media, obviously after COVID, media literacy because of things like fake news, disinformation and misinformation. So these are the things that we are looking at this time. And also, again, going back to the internet, there's need for companies like Google, Facebook, who are not so big then, but now are big players on the media landscape. So this is just what it's all about. It's about updating it, making it relevant to contemporary issues. So we are back in Windhoek. Well, I wasn't here in 91, but yeah, we are back in Windhoek. And it's like a big deal because it's the 30th anniversary and there's lots going on, and just trying to see what we can do to make it a better document, a living document that reflects the contemporary times.
That's great. So I know that this year's theme is information as a public good. And you interestingly mentioned Google and the like, and the role that they play. What does that mean particularly for Southern Africans? Because I know that you are associated with, is it Misa or Misa? I don't know how you say it. So if you could talk about, what information as a public good means for Southern African media and Southern African press, and also maybe share just a little bit more about Misa, apologies. The organization, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm talking too much, isn't it? I'm taking everything away from
worry.
Delta. So the idea is to promote access to information, because with access to information, this is only when people can make informed decisions about their lives and their health. For example, now there's COVID-19, and the information is a bit spotty from the government, if I can use that term. It's not clear. I think across the whole
spectrum.
Yeah. So the information that's coming in is not adequate. People can make informed decisions about their life. So information as a public good I can use information to make myself better or improve my standing or whatever. But as long as I have information, I can make informed decisions about my life. So for example, now a few countries, particularly in Southern Africa, have adopted freedom of information laws. I think the latest being Zimbabwe, but others, I think Botswana comes to mind, don't have such laws. They don't have access to information laws. And these are some of the things that we're campaigning for as a region, so that regional countries can adopt such laws. Zimbabwe, I can speak authoritatively for Zimbabwe because, yeah, that's where I work most of the time, I think. It has an access to information law, but it's not very operational. So this is the next stage of our advocacy and lobby. If you are following Zimbabwean issues, you'll remember in January and late last year, we took the government to court to ask them to make COVID-19 information available, because without that information, really, we are sitting ducks in this pandemic. So those were some of the issues, trying to promote access to information. That information is for the people, really. It's not for someone to keep it in their office or in their desk, but to make it as available as possible to everyone.
Thank you. Delta, turning to you. So you mentioned that you spoke at an event yesterday. So if you could just tell us a little bit more about some of the highlights from that. And also I'm interested in just getting your thoughts on what you think the 30 plus sort of like moving forward, what that should look like, what press freedom should look like, particularly for Southern Africa.
Okay, all right. Well, before I get into that, maybe I'll just join from where Nqaba left off in terms of information as a public good, the concept itself, and how it's especially relevant to the times we were living in terms of COVID. So like Nqaba has already hinted, we've seen so much poor communication from governments across the entire continent. And poor communication means that people's lives are really placed in jeopardy. And then we also have issues of failure to comply. There's poor compliance sometimes with some of the COVID messaging because people don't understand why they're expected to do the things they're expected to do. Governments issue information as decrees, not packaged, in ways that allow citizens to actually absorb and understand. And because COVID requires so much behavior change, and it requires us to move away from ways of being, the ways in which we engage when we're greeting, the ways we engage when we're mourning. All these things are things that COVID now requires us to adjust and adapt to. So increasingly, we need communication to be empathetic, information to actually empower citizens. But we find governments tend to issue threats, ultimatums. So when information is packaged as and weaponized in that manner, it just disempowers citizens, and it places them at great risk. And also, if information doesn't speak to the lived realities of the citizens, that's a problem, because we do understand that there is need for COVID containment measures, but we also have to appreciate the level of disruption to livelihoods at the same time. So we don't get a situation where we have governments that communicate in ways that balance these realities. That say, for example, in countries like Zimbabwe, where 60% of people are employed are in the informal sector, and you have lockdowns that shut down the streets, it means these livelihoods are also at risk. So increasingly, we do see that the way information is shared, there's so much control over information, especially around COVID, because it's also political. and the decision making around COVID, around containing it, is highly, top level. It's highly politicized as well. So all these issues, they sort of come at a time when we have to appreciate the value of information. At other times, we can take it for granted and say, well, there's bread and butter issues to concern ourselves with. Why are we worrying about access to information? Or it's so lofty, it's such a sophisticated idea. But now with COVID, it's really life or death. Somebody could literally die from not knowing, okay, what do you do when somebody's got COVID symptoms? Where is the nearest testing place? What's happening with the vaccinations? And you find a lot of people still look for information that should be readily available. How many days do you have to quarantine? Where are the quarantine centers? What's happening? How do you self-isolate? Where do you go? Where do you purchase masks? How do you wear a mask? Are we wearing this mask correctly? So all that information is information that should by now have saturated, to every aspect of our societies. But we still have those communication gaps because of poor government comms. I'm sorry, it upsets me so much. So I've digressed. Let me go back to your questions. Right. She had questions.
Okay.
I'm going to get
No, it's fine. No, it's absolutely fine. That was really, really helpful and valuable. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So to the questions, the first one was around my talk on Friday. That's fine. And then the next one was around what this 30-year anniversary means to me. So I'll start with the anniversary. One of the things that such an occasion does is that it allows us to look for lessons learned, look for gaps, and just introspect on how the industry has transformed so much. So even as we sit and say, oh, we want to update this declaration so that it becomes a living document, like Nqaba said, we also are mindful of how unpredictable, the future is, the technologies that are coming in are, and what, the media will look like, maybe even in 5 years' time. And like Nqaba said, 1991, it was a very print-centric type of conversation and discourse. It was around newspapers, it was around, and then later it incorporated broadcasting, and then now we've got the internet. So it's a whole new world. But I think whatever tools we use, the values that we are pursuing, the principles, the ideals that we are trying to uphold remain the same. They remain fixed, values around freedom of expression, access to information, the idea that you need to have a range of views represented. You need a fair representation. You need gender equality in the media and through the media. You need women in decision-making, positions within media institutions, whether those institutions are online or broadcasting or print. That representation is so important. And for me, that's one thing that's really been missing in terms of the declaration of this nature. So it doesn't explicitly speak to the need for gender equality, which, and we know women make up half the population. So already we see that there is a gap, a blind spot in that. But like Nqaba says, when we get a chance to review where we are and the times we live in, and in a world and a time where you've got the AU's Agenda 2030 and all these instruments that are looking at how do we mainstream gender, how do we actually make it a reality. So all these things then are also part of what influences what we're looking for in terms of the values we want to pursue. So we're saying we want media independence. We're looking at no political interference. We want no interference from commercial, forces. We want a press that can operate freely. And by press, it's just generic at this point. Press is now all-encompassing. So we're looking at those things. And pluralism was saying there's a diversity of views. And all those views need to be represented on every platform, particularly public broadcasting, right?
Yes.
Yes, because you'll find in some countries, public media is captured, which means it then just represents just one set of very narrow, very elitist, very political, sometimes very toxic views. So all that matters. So independence, freedom, pluralism, and freedom of expression, which are all articulated and expressed through the media. So all that matters to us. And then what I was speaking to on Friday, very quickly, sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, now I'm talking too much. Okay, on Friday, I was sitting on a panel around the transparency of online companies in terms of how where we can promote accountability and transparency, especially from big companies. So one of the things I flagged was the fact that Africa has a very muted voice in discourses and policies around transparency and internet governance, because we don't have much leverage over the big tech companies, the Googles, the Facebook, the Twitters. So you'll find that they can be summoned by congresses and parliaments in Europe, in America, in North America, and they subject themselves to those summons. But I don't see a situation where African countries could summon, Mark Zuckerberg and say, okay, we want to talk about Facebook and how you're conducting Facebook, how are you protecting data, how are you protecting privacy? So Africa doesn't have that kind of leverage. So I'd been arguing to say what perhaps needs to happen is an international human rights framework around issues of internet governance, accountability, and transparency that would then allow African activists, advocates, and countries to use those instruments to also have a voice and speak around those issues. And then I'd also looked at the fact that our contexts are very different in Africa. So we've got issues where you have internet shutdowns. And in the context of an internet shutdowns, it doesn't matter anymore whether there's transparency online or not, because you can't access the internet in the first place, which is one of the things that Nqaba's organization, MISA, really does a lot of work around in terms of freedom of expression online and digital rights as well. So, and then we also looked at issues of transparency and how what transparency looks like in an African context, what it can do. I gave the example of MTN Group, which has a huge presence on the continent. So for the first time in the company's 26-year history, they released a transparency report late last year. And in that report, they were sort of giving examples of the government requests they got to divulge certain information. So governments putting in requests, we want to know the name of this person, we want to know details about this kind of messaging, or so that sort of surveilling type of approach. So, and they were giving examples from 17 markets. So this was from a corporate side. So to say, if we had companies that have a presence on the continent that would also adhere to transparency guidelines, it will also help us in tracking human rights violations and being able to spotlight them. So all of these things and so much more was discussed, but I'll stop here for now.
I thought you were going to stop.
Thank you so much. You touched on issues that I particularly care about, as you said, about the scope of media, what we're talking about, and also the role that these big companies play. I guess one sort of final question is, a lot of people do seem to get their news from social media and non-traditional media. So when we talk about transparency and when we talk about all players sharing values in terms of how information is disseminated, how do you think we can square that? Because I just think so many people share information. There's fake news. There are people who don't consider themselves journalists, but they're sharing information, which becomes a public good. So how do we mitigate against some of the unintended consequences of that? Of those players who are not journalists, but, they are sharing information and are a source of information for millions of people.
Well, I'll go first and very quickly, not to answer your question directly, but one of the things that is being spoken about here is that in big companies, big tech, should be their algorithmic process. I'm trying to sound intelligent.
It's working.
So the idea is, for example, your podcast, how many people is it being shared to? How is it being shared? And how much is Google or Facebook or Twitter making out of your podcast? I think there was a very famous example in Australia where the government ordered Facebook, Google, and them to share revenue with newspapers there, because going back to the media, with the media, I think the issue that's there is it's about viability. Many media companies are losing out because of what these big tech are doing in terms of taking information and sharing it. So the idea is if they are more open, at least I know how much money they made from, you will know how much money they made from your podcast and how much they gave you. And you are in a position, wow, information is a public good. You're in a position to demand more. Exactly, I hadn't thought about that. So yeah, that's the real idea, that they should be open and also sharing of revenues, because many companies are going under, media companies are going under because of Google, Facebook, Twitter, and wherever else is going to come. So if they are more open, if they are more accessible, and if we know how they are sharing our content, it's easier for us to demand more money from them. Even as an individual, it doesn't matter that you're a journalist or anyone. Just as an online content producer, you are adding value to Google or Facebook or Twitter. It's not a fight with big tech, but at least if they are open and they, I think, come up with a win-win situation for everyone, rather than this opaque situation where we have no idea how they're sharing information, or they're sharing into, and what they're getting out of it.
What he said. No, I'm just joking. Can I have the question again? What was the question?
So I think it was a bit muddled on my end, but the question was, we're living in a world where information sources are, a lot of people are getting information from non-traditional media. So how do you, so when we talk about values and transparency and some of the standards that the press should be working towards, how do you mitigate against some of the players that are not journalists, are not traditional media, do not subscribe to those values, do not consider themselves as such, but actually are a source of information? So where we get a lot of fake media and fake news and all that stuff. Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. So maybe to respond to that, I'll start off with something that one of my professors at UCT wrote recently. His name is Professor Herman Wasserman. So one of the things he argued was that one of the ways to deal with misinformation and disinformation is to counter bad information with good information. To say there must be a way to overwhelmingly, have good information, that's accurate information, at least information that meets the various minimums in terms of maybe principles around objectivity, fairness, blah, 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 right? So one of the ways of doing that, it goes back maybe to the algorithms again, to the idea that what is it that these platforms promote? For example, YouTube now demonetized any content that relates to COVID. So you are a YouTuber and you've got a huge following and you mention COVID, that video is going to be demonetized. You won't get any ad revenue, no matter how many people view it. So for them, they're disincentivizing people from using COVID as a money spinner. It means, if you want to spread conspiracy theories about COVID using your huge platform, the fact that you're not going to get paid for it should disincentivize you. It then leaves those people who genuinely want to share information for no other reason than that this is what I want to do. So it takes money away as an incentive for that. So we need to stop. I think we need to have platforms that can stop rewarding people for bad information. Stop rewarding people for having, clickbait content. Stop rewarding platforms for having salacious content, sexist content, racist content, leftist, rightist, all these extremist types of content that are just meant to drive eyeballs onto your platforms. So when we can have these algorithms, if they can work to filter, and you take away the money aspect of it. When Zuckerberg was called by the US Congress and they were asking him, how come Facebook is free? He says, we run on ads. So all these people they're incentivized by the idea, okay, what can we write that is so scandalous, that is so shocking, that will go viral,
that will incendiary.
Yes, that will get us money. Because whenever you reward that, then obviously people are incentivized to churn out more and more of that content. If somebody has a platform and consistently the best performing content is the content that's really the worst version of ourselves, there's no way they're going to stop covering issues that way or framing issues in that manner. Or if xenophobia pays, if content about that xenophobic pays, then obviously that's more of the content you will see. And then in terms of, non-traditional sources of information, I think, it's a given now that they're called peripheral actors. They're referred to as that, act outside the periphery of journalism. But in many of their operations serve the functions that journalism do. Some of them would look like maybe fact-checking platforms or open parley. What we've seen here in Zambia and in Zimbabwe, where you've got these startups that focus only on parliamentary news. They'll go to parliament, they'll live tweet, they'll give you, video. And those kinds of outfits are really the base in simply bringing parliament to where the people are, bringing that kind of access in that kind of platform, in that kind of manner, because that's not how traditional media operates. With traditional media, the parliament bit is where the money is made, because that's the front page news, that's the headline stories, that's the bulletin. So obviously these actions also undercut the revenues of traditional media, but that's neither here nor there, because we now live in a world where that kind of access is enabled by the technologies that we have at our disposal. So in terms of what can be done, there's really nothing that can be done except to disincentivize, that kind of content, to make sure that there's as little reward as possible for churning out information that is of public harm, as opposed to being of public good. That sounded
clever.
Yeah. Thank you.
It sounded very clever. Thank you so much. In closing, World Press Freedom Day on the 3rd of May. Where can people get more information about some of the activities that are happening? Because some people will either watch or listen to this after the 3rd of May. So how can they engage with that? And if you could share.
Oh, wow. Okay, there's a UNESCO platform. I'm not too sure of the website off my head.
And the hashtag World Press Freedom Day
or W.
Yeah.
PFD.
Yeah. But definitely, it's not just being commemorated here, it's all over the world.
Yeah.
So the hashtag is being used by other events, globally. And
for Southern Africa, they can check on MISA website. We've got a dedicated page, wh@30.misa.org or something like that. That covers the whole of Southern Africa. As part of these celebrations, now I'm advertising my products, but I'm not going to pay. As part of these projects, we've produced a Southern Africa Press Freedom Report, which Delta contributed to.
It's true.
We've also produced the
it is.
a dossier. Okay.
I have it.
All right. We've also produced a dossier, like content from African writers, really. It's going out tomorrow. It's going to be part of the Namibian newspaper. It's going to be part of Newsday in Zimbabwe. Probably it's going to go out on May 3, which Natasha contributed to. So, yeah, that's just about it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the report is also available in soft copy.
Yes, it's available.
So,
both copies are available online.
Yeah. And I would encourage people to get a hold of it. Basically, what it does is looking at the state of press. So we're using press very generically, but we're looking at the working conditions of journalists in the region. So definitely, it's a riveting read.
If you say so.
Especially my chapter. The chapter I wrote is amazing. Well done.
Thank you so much. I will actually read it, and that's how I will read your chapter. Thank you so much. So the hashtag is World Press Freedom Day, which you can engage with even after the 3rd of May. So thank you so much, Nqaba. Thank you so much, Delta, for taking the time to talk to us. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natasha.
Cheers.